Since gaining independence from Britain almost 4 decades ago, the Bahamas has seen tremendous developments over the years. There has been a major thrust by successive governments to modernize the country in areas like tourism, education, and the media, where considerable achievements have been made. The latter, a small but vibrant industry that has blossomed with many technological advancements in the past few years. But before independence in 1973, the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas, the national voice, held a monopoly on the media industry. Back in the 1930s, it launched ZNS Radio, which at the time was the only station that aired in every island. Some years later, ZNS Television, the first TV station, was introduced.
ZNS was the only broadcast station in the entire Commonwealth covering all 700 islands in the sunny Bahamas. Only the sun covers the Bahamas better than ZNS, better than Radio Bahamas is what the slogan used to say at one point in time.
Veteran journalist and former news director for television and radio at ZNS, Steve McKinney, explained that newspapers like the Nassau Guardian and Tribune, with a combined existence of over 200 years, were the only other media organizations around. He says the business, post-independence, was well respected. Fast forward to 1993, during the post-independence era, the monopoly held by ZNS had finally been broken. The Free National Movement government, who had just unrooted the Progressive Liberal Party, the longest governing party in an independent Bahamas, issued the first private radio license. Wendell Jones, who now serves as the chief executive officer at Jones Communications Network, was one of two early recipients. In the ensuing decades, more and more radio stations began to emerge. Soon, there were two more competing television stations, Cable 12 and Channel 14, a subsidiary of JCN. But it was during that time, Mr. McKinney claims, things became more political.
Today, in the Bahamas, broadcasting has a lot of influence from the political aspect of things. That's not a good thing because we're supposed to be free from all of that kind of thing. But, of course, if you came from the old way of the corporation, this place was stacked. ZNS in those days was stacked with people who were, I wouldn't call them cronies of the government, I would say, who were supporters of the government and who government saw to it got jobs, successive governments saw to it got jobs in the major corporation. They got jobs from different constituencies. And so they became part and parcel of the way the corporation worked. And that is still with us today in many regards, even though it has been tempered down a little bit. And the present administration is trying to change all that. It is still very political in the case of the corporation of ZNS. But private radio has opened the door for new people and even old veterans, such as myself, to go out and explore and do other things. And that has made the industry grow to a point where persons like Mr. Wendell Jones, for instance, at Love 97, has been able to do his own radio station and expand and make the market grow and bring in new and young journalists who are now doing a fantastic job in the country.
And with the proliferation of private media, Mr. McKinney claims a lot of media organizations have become affiliated with political groups.
We've got to do more investigative journalism. We don't do enough of that. And that's because of the high political play in our whole country, you see.
Time and time again, Bahamian journalists have been criticized by the public for not doing much investigative reporting. Sasha Lightbourne, a reporter with Love 97 News, says it's not because journalists are lazy or uninterested, but simply because journalists are stifled in their efforts.
I think we are struggling. I think, too, though, we must remember that we're still a very, very small country. We know everybody. We know everyone in the media. We know a lot of people out there, and it just seems as if people seem to be so reluctant to give information.
Here is where the Freedom of Information Act comes in. For decades, Bahamian journalists presently working and those that have left the industry have been advocating for the legislation. Successive governments have promised it, but nothing has ever been tabled in Parliament.
They promised that, but we don't know how seriously committed they are to that, Kendeno. The truth of the matter is that they're not committed to it to the point where they see it as developing the Bahamas. We are a country that needs the development. We've got to get to the other level.
You can't exist as a, let's say, a developing country if you don't have freedom of information. How is it possible that a government agency or a government employee, worker, anybody in the government agency can have stuff that's hidden? Why can't I go out there and find information easily about MP who may have a business that government is giving contracts to, that he is giving contracts to. So that's you need stuff like that, and you need to have something where the people can go out there and find this information and get it easily.
Ryan Adderley, a cameraman with JCN Television, is not happy with the general media situation. Locals like Mandy Dean are also not impressed with the service.
I don't feel like we're getting investigative journalism in the Bahamas. I feel like when we read the paper or watch the news, we're getting just facts, and that's dictated to the journalist from whomever their source is. There's really no digging deeper or finding out the true meaning, because sometimes it might be the next day that you find out the information is not correct, and that's only because maybe they have one source, or they have a source, but their source is not reliable.
But Sieska Adderley, a reporter with the Bahama Journal, insists that besides not having a Freedom of Information Act, journalists around the country are for the most part strapped to get any kind of investigations going.
When you were looking at a staff of under 10 trying to fill up 3 mediums, radio, TV, and newspaper, you're stretched pretty thin in a day.
Our journalists are going to have to make the commitment that we're going to have to push as a unit. And it doesn't matter where you work, as a unit of journalists, to try to foster this tabling, this passage of a Freedom of Information Act. And until that happens, we're going to be stuck right here, still debating whether or not we should have one.
And while for the most part media organizations are free to report on issues, there are countless stories that are left untold.
When I was in college, I had a friend at ZNest, a local broadcasting agency at the time, and they did a story about a government agency locally here. And the lady told me it was a great story, but it will never air because it showed the government agency in a bad light. And it did not air until a couple of years later. It aired recently, last year, I think. There is no rights that protect the journalist, as far as I know. And that is something that even me, myself, as a cameraman, I want to do certain stories, but I can't do them because of the circumstances that would arise because of it.
But despite all the challenges, the industry continues to grow. There now exists more than a dozen radio stations, 3 daily newspapers, and 3 television networks. These journalists say there is still room for greater advancements.
Yes, we have grown tremendously. Technologically speaking, we have grown tremendously. And of course, as far as the human resource is concerned, we have more interest in journalism. When I was coming up as a young journalist, there was not that much interest.
I guess the biggest success would be in television, because right now you do have a lot of, well, not a lot, but you've got 2 or 3 TV stations. And I think that has been our greatest advancement. It has taken forever for us to get there.
We're making progress. Because as you can see, there's more than one station, so you have options of what to listen to on your different news sources. But because it's new, we're limited in resources as well. And so I think that's where we're at as a country. We're progressing. But like Ryan said, we could be a lot further. And I think we're going to get there. But I'm not sure if the younger journalists have the patience to wait it out like our predecessors that basically broke ground for us. So I think we're juggling a lot of things, but we're still trying to move the profession forward.
Do you think that the industry is respected?
Yes and no. I think a lot of people, especially in our country, don't know what reporters have to go through. It's not an easy job. I always tell people we have to be doctors, lawyers, police, government officials. We have to be able to understand any topic and break it down. I particularly, for example, I'm not good with numbers, but when they come in a story that I may have to deal with, I have to be able to break that down for the average man to understand. That's not an easy task, especially when you know what your strengths and weaknesses are as a reporter. So I think, in that regard, it's not respected. I think the older generations probably do respect the fact that news drives the country. A lot of the older generation always say news is the 4th pillar in the country. It's a very important industry. It's a very important pillar. People say we're the 4th estate as well. So it gives it some sort of credence, some sort of importance. But overall, I think, like I said, I would have to answer that question 50-50 yes and no, because I still don't think that generally we're considered an overall essential service to the country.